Long ago, each of us first appeared into the world without language, without the ability to understand language, but with an ability to understand and to seek out connections. When we were born, depending on when that happened and where you were, whether it was a midwife or a doctor, or if you were born at home, on the farm, wherever it happened to be, the first thing that you wanted was to know that you were not alone. That's what we have in common. We came into this world with a desire to connect. We know that this is true. I mean, some of you have been blessed if you weren't able to be there for your own kids' births. You've been there maybe for your grandkids. How about that first time you get to smell your grandchild's head? Take that life in. We know that children need to make connections. They may not have the words yet. They don't have language yet, but they have cries. And parents and those around them become familiar with the sounds they make. You can tell in the type of cry that they make what they want, whether it's they're hungry or whether it's attention, whatever it is. And you have to just recognize as you look at a baby that those babies are simply trying to understand how they belong to others. They're not necessarily thinking they're on their own. They see the world and relate to the world as we all did originally, as an us. As an us. Think about what it's like. Some of you will go to maybe Bob Evans or someplace after church for food, and you may be blessed if at a table nearby a young family shows up with a baby. Don't you love it? When they bring those babies in, they sit them there. And what's the first thing you do? Man, you're just looking at that baby, hoping they look at you. Because you know you have the magic touch. And there is no baby in the world that can resist you and your power. They look you in the eye, and you look at them, and they smile. It makes your day. You want to be connected. And there's something that takes place in that exchange. The facial expressions, the eyes, the laughter that they sometimes give you. And the poor parents are like, who are all these people staring at my child? Why is that man coming up and touching my child? We all have that in common, the us. Now, some of us have difficulty trying to identify ourselves today. Things have changed so much that to understand who we are, it's changing. For example, I know when Pastor Arlen, your previous interim pastor, when he writes things, I've seen this, he's one of these pastors, and I applaud him for doing it, who puts Reverend Arlen Renava and he, him, his by it. Have you seen those? Some of you may do that. You at least have seen it or heard about it, how people identify he, him, hers, she, her, hers, or they, them. We have these different ways that people are now identifying, and it's hard. It's hard for us to kind of relate, and for those of us that are a little older, myself included, that's new stuff. And it's difficult to try to figure out how to navigate these new waters when it comes to identity. But I want to suggest today, as we enter into the third part of the Good Community, a series that we've been doing for the last 2 weeks, that we enter into this because today's part of the Good Community is about openness. It's about an open heart and an open mind. And so instead of having to put the designation he, him, hers, or she, her, hers, we now identify simply as we, or us. That's really our identification. When we're born, I don't think we're thinking me, although sometimes you look at a baby and think that's all they're about, me, but it's not. They sound more like we. We all the way home. We want to understand ourselves in the connection of being together. And isn't it interesting that in some cultures, the Native American culture in particular, there's no word for me or mine. There's no identity for me or mine. It's us. Who are we without us? We identify as a we, as a collective. Many cultures throughout the world don't do what we do and think, me, mine, mine. That's not how we identify. It's us. It's we. So this morning, in the third part of the building of the good community, we want to look at what Paul is sharing with the church in Rome and why it's important for Paul, who may actually be in jail in Corinth when he's writing this. Think of that. Writing to a community that he himself did not personally establish, but he knows it's there. And Paul sees how important and significant it is that there be this door to the west in Rome. That if we could start to build a good community and have it extend from Rome to the further west, how great that would be for God's kingdom. Because we are God's kingdom. We are kingdom people. Today we celebrate the Constitution and part of being of the United States, but we've never lived in a kingdom before that. We were in a kingdom before that Constitution was signed, before our liberty was signed. We were in Great Britain, a kingdom. But most of us today have no idea what it is to live in a kingdom, to be part of a kingdom, what that actually means. So a better understanding of the kingdom of God, that thing that Jesus came to establish, that he told his disciples was at hand, is to understand what we are building. He wants us to build this kingdom. The kingdom is not a country. It's not a palace. It is a community. The kingdom of God is nothing more than the good community. The good community. And when we first visited Paul in his letter to Romans, we were in chapter 12, and we saw how the first part of being this good community was that we be a community of peace. That means stillness. It means when we're okay with each other, we're like the sheep in Psalm 23. We're led to these green grass so that we can be there and rest, and to the cool, clear waters that God provides. And we have no worries because God is with us. We are truly at peace. That's a good community. We also learned that the good community is rooted and established in love, because God is love and we are created in God's image, so therefore we are love. That is the nature of who we are, and the connections that we are making are all made through that idea of love. That we are loved, God's love is in us, and we are reaching out and sharing that love with others. So it's then natural, if we want to be this good community, to recognize this valuable piece in Paul's letter today that really helps us put together what it is to be the good community. And although the words are a little different in Paul's language here, what he's really saying is, folks, we have to have an open heart and an open mind. We have to have an open heart and an open mind to be a good community. That is, to be a community of peace, a community of love. We have to be open in love and open in spirit to the leading of God's Spirit. And most, if not everything, in Jesus' ministry, in his teachings, had to do with having an open heart and an open mind. Think of that. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to travel with our tour choir to England, to that old kingdom that we celebrate our freedom from today. In that kingdom, we went to both Oxford and Cambridge. And I don't remember which one was which in terms of the symbol. But they both had two similar symbols because they're institutions of learning. One has a book that is closed, and another, for their symbol, has a book that is open. Open. So you can imagine the jokes that both of these institutions had going back and forth. For example, the open book people would laugh at the other ones, saying, look, they haven't even figured out how to open the book yet. Closed book people would say, look at these guys. They're not even finished with the book yet. They're only halfway through. You know, when you think about it, which image do you think is better? To be open or to be closed? Now, it's one thing if we're closed because we finished the book and we're on to something else. That's one thing. But to never have opened it? Clearly, the better would be to be at least halfway through, right? If we're thinking that way. Openness. What does it mean to you to have an open heart and an open mind? And how easy is it for us to do that? I started out a little earlier talking about our identity, how we identify, recognizing that today there are people, maybe your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, or at least some of their friends, have new identities today. My son grew up in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, and his first class was actually in first grade. And it was a rather traumatic year because that was the year that Brett Favre retired. There was a lot of weeping when it was announced in that fall that Brett Favre was retiring that year. Teachers were crying in school. They had like a moment of silence in the elementary school when that happened. But he loved his classroom. And I got to meet kids that from first grade to second grade to third grade to fourth, all the way through high school. I got to know some of these kids. And I got to spend a lot of time with them on various occasions. Just as a parent, but also as a local pastor, I had an opportunity to meet kids. Some of those very kids that I saw grow up are now no longer carrying the same name or sexual identity. I don't get it. Maybe you don't get that either. Whatever happened to her? You mean him? What? You know, there's a lot of stretching that we have to do in life. And most of us have at least some level of ability to do that. But as Mary Kay, who teaches yoga, can attest, some of us are more flexible than others. I am one of the least flexible people in terms of physical flexibility that was ever in a gym class. In fact, when I was playing football and we were doing our exercises and stretching, I had to have one of the coaches actually would sit on my back to get me to stretch. And he couldn't make me move at all. That thing was not stretching. Whatever it was not stretching. And I was still flexible, but not in the way others were. I could never reach down and touch my toes. I just couldn't do it for whatever reason. Some kids could bend down like no problem. They could put their legs behind their head. Or they could do those splits. How in the world is that physically possible? I don't know, but some people can do it. Some people are just more naturally flexible in that way. And it's also true in life. Some people just tend to have more open hearts and more flexible minds to embrace new ideas and new things. Some of us are a little more set in our ways. I really noticed this when I was doing youth ministry as a part of one of my other churches, and I would try to put together a dinner for the youth. Now, what kid doesn't like pizza? You know any kids that don't like pizza? Well, I met some. How is this humanly possible that teenagers don't like pizza? But I had a couple of kids, for whatever reason, hated everything and would only eat one thing. The strangest item, hot dogs. That's all they would eat. We'd have a buffet at church, potluck. They wouldn't eat anything unless somebody brought a hot dog. And all they'd put on it was ketchup. Not mustard, not relish. Remember Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry? No one, and I mean no one, puts ketchup on a hot dog. But anyway, they wouldn't do it. That's all they would eat for years. And you know what? Their family was fine with it. You know, you have to be now. You have to be flexible that way. That's okay. And all I could think of was all the stuff they're missing. And then I thought of myself. When I was a kid, the only meal that I would eat was tomato soup and peanut butter bread. That was it. My mom had to make that if she wanted me to eat anything. I didn't want to try new things. Maybe you had kind of a finicky past yourself, or one of your kids was finicky. Maybe your spouse is a little finicky. And yet you have this grand buffet in front of you. That's what we'd have at church. All these wonderful foods for these kids to try and to sample. Nope, just give me a hot dog with ketchup. That was it. And we can laugh about that because it seems kind of a shame. It's tragic in a way to not be able to savor the taste of a good pizza. What they're missing in life. But think about the choices that we sometimes make. We eat what we eat. Most of you are going to go to a restaurant after church today that you've been to, and you know what? The waitress or server probably says, "You want the same?" Yeah, give me the same. I'm no different. If I go to a restaurant and 30,000 things on the menu, I'm still going to get the same thing. You eat what you know. And that's where many of us are comfortable. We sing the hymns that we know. We do church the way we know it. And that's the way it was for Paul. People were doing things the way they knew it. And in Paul's world, the reality was there was so much variety, just like there is for us. But in Paul's life, he was Roman, but he's also Jewish. And now not only was he Roman and Jewish, now he's Christian. He's got all of that. He's got a buffet in his life. And as a Jew, he was a Pharisee. That was a pretty strict diet in every way, not just the food, but in the lifestyle. There's a certain way of doing things, a certain way of behaving, and you had to do it, no question. You just did it. And he followed that discipline. Being a Jew meant a certain discipline in life. Eating kosher is hard. Eating kosher is not for the weak. And it takes discipline to do it. And while we may not eat kosher, we can appreciate maybe the value of what they were gaining from that. The purpose of doing it in the first place was to learn more about God, to be open to the presence of God. That's why they did it. To be a community, to eat and follow the same things. They wanted to know that they were a community. It wasn't about themselves. It was about being connected to their ancestors, to those present, and to those in the future. They were the children of Abraham. And they wanted to celebrate that each day by the way in which they ate, and the way in which they prepared food, the way in which they cleaned themselves. All of that was part of a ritual. And that ritual was not flexible, as you saw in many of the stories relating to Jesus, like healing on the Sabbath. That was a no-no, but he did it. He did it because he wanted to teach openness. Or how about when Jesus would meet with people that even his disciples, who were Jews, were very uncomfortable with? That day that he goes to the house of Zacchaeus, the wee little man, the tax collector, his disciples are like, whoa, Lord, do you know what you're doing? I don't think you realized how the people will react and respond to this if you do this. But Jesus always was open. And he was teaching us to be open. Open to people, open to new ideas, open to new things. He never shut the door. Okay, there's one occasion, which we had in the scripture several weeks ago, where the Samaritan woman comes to him. And she teaches Jesus, seemingly, well, don't even the dogs deserve the scraps under the table? And Jesus said, woman, your faith is strong, and your daughter is healed because of your faith. That's a lesson of openness, not of being closed. So part of being in the good community then is that we have to teach a new way of being. And so Paul is writing to these people who have gathered in Rome representing many different backgrounds of the world of Rome. Wealthy, poor, in the army. Some were just slaves. There was all one community though. And they shared that in common, making that connection, that this is what it is to build the good community. It's a place where we're at peace together, where we share what we have. It's a place where we love each other. And it's a place where we remain open to people who come from different places. We're not all the same. We have to make ourselves flexible. It doesn't come naturally. It takes effort. It takes work to become more flexible. And I think one of the problems that we have in church and why Paul is writing to his church in Rome is because churches just naturally tend to be a little stiff. We just tend to not want to stretch too much. Maybe we just don't like sweating. Or maybe we don't like the pain that's sometimes caused in stretching. And let me tell you, I remember in gym, it hurt trying to stretch those legs. It hurts. I don't like hurting. I don't know about you, but I don't particularly like pain. But we have to do it if we want to get more flexible. We have to do it and stretch and be open if we want to be the good kingdom that Jesus calls us to be. The kingdom of God, the good community. The good community. It takes a lot. And I know that there have been moments in your life where you've had to be open to new ideas and new things, and you didn't want to do it. And maybe there's times in your life when you were open to new ideas and new things, and you opened yourself up to it, and then in some way you got hurt, or you felt injured in some way. That's a risk not worth taking. That happens in life. We all know that life is difficult, that sometimes it's hard to take chances when pain is involved. But that's precisely what Paul is writing to the church in Rome about. They're getting upset about food and about how food is prepared, the kind of food we eat. And they're getting upset with each other because, frankly, if you live together in a community, you're going to have problems. You're going to have disputes from time to time. And we're not all going to get along. And yet, the good community is a community that recognizes the value of peace and stillness in our lives, that we have to make peace with each other. The good community is a place that is rooted in love, and the good community is a place that values the practice of having an open heart and an open mind. Now, I say both the open heart and the open mind because can you have one without the other? Can you really be an open-hearted person if you have a closed mind? If you're shut off to new ideas or new people? Can you really say you have an open heart? And can you say you have an open mind if your heart is just small, if it's shut off? You can't really have an open heart without an open mind. You can't have an open mind without an open heart. That's a hard lesson for people. It's a hard lesson for the church today. Churches are having to learn a new way of being. We want to be what we've always been. But here's the problem. Is that working? Is it working to just remain the same, to keep doing the same things? There's two words that are important in understanding where the church is today. Two words: method and mission. Method and mission. Now, the method is what happens when churches find a way to be the church. We create a method, a practice. It includes our rituals. It includes the buildings and how we build the buildings, the parking lots. It includes the way we structure the church. That's the method. How we have boards, how we set up Sunday school, how we do our confirmation classes, how we do everything, how we do potlucks, how we do funerals and baptisms. Everything is part of the method. And most churches have a difficult time moving beyond the method because it's what we know. And here's the problem, and I'll get to the mission in just a second. A church analyst who spent his life and career helping churches grow or helping them change, he's a consultant, a church consultant, wrote a book recently called The Autopsy of a Diseased Church. The Autopsy of a Diseased Church. And in this book, he doesn't just look at one church, he looks at all churches. And he, in fact, one of the writers of this book, is serving a church in the Chicago area. I think a Presbyterian church, but he's serving a church in that particular area. And that church is dying. The church is down to 40 members, and that church is going to be gone by the end of the writing of the book, he says. It's just going to be gone. Nothing they could do about it. And it wasn't their fault. It's that life has changed, the communities have changed. But what he was able to do in this book is go into churches and help identify symptoms. If you go to the doctor and some of us are very resistant to go to the doctor when we're not feeling well, but just think if Tom didn't go, think if Earl didn't go. You'd still be in pain. The disease would still be there, it'd just be worse. Now, we don't necessarily like hearing that there's something wrong with us when we're sick, but think of the consequences if we don't do it. He uses an analogy in this book about a guy who was told that, he needed to do something or it would get worse, and he decided, I feel fine. And then he waited and waited and waited until finally he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, look, it's too late. It's too late now. Bummer is all he could say. I wish I had gone earlier is all he could say. And that's kind of the cycle he sees in the church. We identify then what are the symptoms of a diseased church. And he identified it pretty simply. A diseased church is a church that is kind of closed heart, closed mind. They don't want to be stretched. They don't want to stretch. They don't want to do things in a new way. They want new people. Who doesn't? They want kids. They want young families to start pouring in again like the old days. But the problem is they don't want to change. They want it to be the same, and they don't want to have to take any pills or have chemo or anything else. It's just, I want to be well. What do we need to do to be well? That's one of the symptoms that he looked at in churches. So that's the method part. But he said the churches that were getting through the illness and healing were the churches that rather than focusing on the method, they focused on the mission. What is the mission of the church? Which is what Paul is writing about to the Romans. Remember why we are here. Remember why we gather. We people of God, we gather to build the good community. We are here, and the purpose of the church remains to make disciples for Jesus Christ in order to transform the world. That's it. That's it. That's our purpose. And our mission is to do that. It always was. This church was built in the 1800s by a group of pioneers, settlers, some of your family members. They had a mission, but today is a new day. Today is a new day. And we also have a mission, that same mission, to make disciples for Jesus Christ in order to transform the world. We came into this world as babies, seeking to make connections. And that has not changed. Our purpose is to make those connections, to be the healthy alternative to the world, to be the church in Rome, to represent the healthy alternative to a diseased and dying world.